In June 2024, FBI agent Pat McMonigle resigned after years working a case so psychologically devastating it diagnosed him with PTSD. He wasn't alone. At least 9 of his colleagues took their own lives, many suffering from the same post-traumatic stress disorder that broke their careers. The cases we work, one agent would later say, they don't just stay at the office. 3 months before his resignation, Pat McMonigle was a 44-year-old FBI analyst, agent, and field supervisor with 19 years of service. His resume read like a catalog of the Bureau's most demanding assignments. He'd investigated national security crimes, served as a hostage negotiator and Joint Terrorism Task Force coordinator, trained dozens of special agents, and deployed overseas 3 times. In 2017, he earned the Combat Theater Award for his work in Afghanistan, one of 24 commendations accumulated across his career. By any measure, McMonigle was exactly the kind of agent the FBI assigned to cases that demanded psychological resilience. The case that broke him seemed routine at first. The FBI had assembled a team of seasoned investigators, not rookies, but agents who had handled terrorism, organized crime, and cases that made national headlines. Their psychological profiles showed they could manage extreme stress. The Bureau's own assessment protocols had identified them as capable of processing the most disturbing material without fracturing. But something about this particular investigation was different. The evidence they were processing, the interviews they were conducting, the crime scenes they were documenting, it all combined into something that veteran investigators later described as unlike anything they'd encountered in their careers. What made it so psychologically devastating wasn't just its content, but its duration and scope. Unlike terrorism cases that might involve a single attack or organized crime investigations that follow predictable patterns, this case kept expanding. Every lead opened new avenues of horror. Every breakthrough revealed additional victims. The agents found themselves trapped in an investigation that seemed to have no bottom, processing evidence that grew more disturbing with each passing week. McMonigle and his colleagues were experiencing something their training had never prepared them for. Not a case, but a descent. By February 2022, the investigation had become something that would haunt McMonigle and his colleagues for years. The evidence they were processing included testimonies describing systematic abuse, children coerced into self-harm, victims manipulated into recruiting other victims, and a network structure designed to maximize psychological damage. The case had started as a routine suicide investigation in a Gig Harbor grocery store parking lot. A 13-year-old who had posted on Discord looking for LGBTQ friends and crochet buddies was brought into a live chat where others began telling him he should kill himself within an hour. Local police suspected something more sinister was involved, but what the FBI agents discovered as they dug deeper defied their experience with traditional criminal networks. The investigation led them into a decentralized network of predators operating across platforms, seeking out vulnerable teenagers as trophies to gain status and notoriety. McMonigle, who was leading the investigation, described how these perpetrators were operating with systematic precision, identifying targets, isolating them psychologically, and then coercing them into self-harm while documenting everything. What made this case psychologically devastating wasn't just the content. McMonigle and his team had processed disturbing material before. It was the systematic nature of the abuse and the way it kept expanding. Each victim they identified had been manipulated into recruiting others. Each breakthrough revealed additional layers of coordination that suggested this wasn't a single perpetrator or even a traditional criminal organization, but a decentralized network of sadists using technology to weaponize children against themselves and each other. When McMonigle told superiors about the mental effects he was experiencing from the case, they ordered him to turn in his gun and interviewed colleagues about his fitness to serve, a response that left him feeling betrayed by an institution that claimed to support mental health struggles. The investigation was revealing something that would challenge everything the FBI thought it knew about online predation, and the agents tasked with stopping it were discovering that their own psychological defenses, built over decades of law enforcement experience, were no match for the systematic evil they were uncovering. Based on the evidence McMonigle and his team were processing, children coerced into self-harm and a network designed to maximize psychological damage. Do you think there should be mandatory mental health support for investigators working these cases? Comment your answer below. Now, let's examine what happened when McMonigle tried to get help from his own agency. 2 weeks before McMonigle's resignation, the FBI's response to his deteriorating mental state revealed an institutional failure that would prove as devastating as the case itself. When he approached his supervisors about the psychological toll the investigation was taking, the sleepless nights, the intrusive thoughts, the way evidence from the case followed him home, their reaction wasn't support or understanding. Instead, they ordered him to surrender his weapon and subjected him to fitness for duty interviews with colleagues, treating his request for help as a sign of professional incompetence rather than human vulnerability. The irony was stark. Here was an agent who had earned 24 commendations, survived missile strikes in Afghanistan, and negotiated with terrorists, being questioned about his fitness to serve because he was honest about needing psychological support. The same institution that had trained him to handle the most extreme situations was now punishing him for acknowledging that this particular case had pushed him beyond his psychological limits. The message was unmistakable. Admitting you were struggling wasn't seen as responsible self-awareness. It was seen as weakness that could end your career. But the institutional response to McMonigle's crisis pointed to something larger. At least 9 FBI colleagues had already taken their own lives, many suffering from the same post-traumatic stress disorder that was now consuming him. The pattern was becoming undeniable. Agents were breaking under the psychological weight of cases, like the one McMonigle was investigating. But the Bureau's institutional response was to isolate and question them rather than provide the support they desperately needed. The very agents who had dedicated their careers to protecting others were being abandoned by their own organization when they needed protection themselves. What made McMonigle's situation particularly tragic was that he recognized what was happening to him. The horror of working on the case had left him with debilitating PTSD, and unlike his colleagues who had succumbed to despair, he was fighting to survive. But the FBI's response to his plea for help, the weapon surrender, the fitness interviews, the implicit suggestion that seeking mental health support was a disqualifying weakness, was pushing him toward the same fate that had claimed his colleagues. The institution that should have been his lifeline was instead becoming another source of trauma, forcing him to choose between his career and his life. Within 6 months of McMonigle's breakdown, the pattern became impossible for FBI leadership to ignore. Field supervisors across multiple divisions were reporting the same disturbing trend. Experienced agents working child exploitation cases were walking away from their careers at unprecedented rates. The exodus wasn't random. Agents with decades of service, investigators who had survived terrorism cases and organized crime assignments, were submitting resignation letters within months of being assigned to cases like the one that destroyed McMonigle's mental health. What made this departure wave different from typical burnout was its speed and the caliber of agents leaving. These weren't junior analysts or support staff. These were seasoned field supervisors and senior investigators, the exact personnel the Bureau could least afford to lose. The institutional response revealed how unprepared the Bureau was for this crisis. Internal communications obtained through whistleblower disclosures painted a picture of an agency scrambling to rebuild. Field offices were reporting that entire units dedicated to child exploitation were being gutted by resignations. Supervisors who had managed these divisions for years were describing something they'd never seen before: agents who could handle the most extreme violence and depravity when it was contained to individual cases, but who were breaking down when confronted with the systematic, networked nature of the abuse they were now investigating. The pattern was becoming clear to those willing to see it. The traditional model of rotating agents through child exploitation assignments, a practice designed to prevent the kind of psychological damage that had always been recognized as an occupational hazard, was collapsing under the weight of cases that didn't follow traditional investigation patterns. The cases agents like McMonigle were working weren't discrete investigations with clear endpoints. They were ongoing descents into networks of abuse that seemed to expand endlessly, revealing new victims and new perpetrators with each breakthrough. The psychological toll wasn't just severe, it was cumulative and apparently inescapable, even for agents who had previously been considered psychologically bulletproof. For the first time, the FBI was losing experienced investigators faster than it could replace them, and the Bureau had no protocol for what came next. Pat McMonigle's resignation in June 2024 marked the end of a 19-year FBI career that had included investigating national security crimes, serving as a hostage negotiator and Joint Terrorism Task Force coordinator, training dozens of special agents, and earning 24 commendations, including the Combat Theater Award for his 2017 deployment to Afghanistan. His departure also represented something larger, a breaking point that would force the Bureau to confront the psychological cost of cases it was asking agents to handle. The aftermath revealed patterns that FBI leadership could no longer ignore. McMonigle had lost at least 9 colleagues to suicide, many suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. His own experience with a case so devastating in 2022 that he was diagnosed with PTSD had become part of a growing crisis within the Bureau's child exploitation units. The investigation that broke him, involving an online network that encouraged vulnerable young people to release sexually explicit material, hurt themselves, and even die by suicide, represented a new category of psychological warfare that traditional law enforcement training had never anticipated. What made McMonigle's case particularly significant was not just the horror of what he investigated, but the institutional response when he sought help. The investigation left him with irreparable scars and debilitating PTSD, but the FBI's reaction to his deteriorating mental health, ordering him to surrender his weapon and subjecting him to fitness interviews, revealed an agency unprepared to support agents facing unprecedented psychological challenges. The message was clear. Seeking help for trauma was treated as a professional liability rather than a necessary response to cases that push human psychological limits beyond what any training could prepare agents to handle. The ripple effects extended far beyond McMonigle's departure. Field supervisors across the Bureau began reporting unprecedented resignation rates among experienced agents working child exploitation cases. The traditional model of rotating agents through these assignments, designed to prevent exactly the kind of psychological damage that destroyed McMonigle's career, was collapsing under the weight of investigations that didn't follow traditional patterns. Unlike discrete criminal cases with clear endpoints, the network nature of online predation meant agents found themselves trapped in investigations that expanded endlessly, revealing new victims and perpetrators with each breakthrough. By early 2026, the institutional crisis had become undeniable. Senate oversight letters were demanding detailed accounting of agent departures, vacancies, and caseloads in child exploitation units, while internal dysfunction reached levels that raised serious questions about the agency's ability to investigate terrorism, organized crime, and child exploitation. The FBI was losing experienced investigators faster than it could replace them, and the psychological toll of cases like the one that destroyed McMonigle's career had revealed fundamental gaps in how the Bureau prepared and supported agents facing the darkest corners of human behavior. Subscribe for more untold law enforcement stories. Watch next how an FBI investigation into online predation broke seasoned agents and forced resignations across the Bureau.